Great. Hello, my name is Dr. April Willis, and I'm very excited to be here with you today as we talk about state testing preparation and strategies. We're going to be improving instruction while increasing morale through a number of tried and true strategies for your K through 12 students. I'm coming to you with a background in campus, district, and state level education, got a doctorate and 3 master's degree. I know what you are going through. I speak your language. Prior to the work that I'm doing now, I was a classroom teacher for many years, and I at one point was teaching kindergarten through 3rd grade all day long without a break. So a multi-level classroom, no break, all the students at the same time. So I'm teaching kindergartners their alphabet, and I'm teaching 3rd graders how to pass the STAR test, which is what we call it here in Texas. And so I'm absolutely familiar with what this looks like. And I went on to become a testing coordinator for the campus. And then I was also a district testing coordinator as well. And so when it comes to testing, I feel like I lived and breathed it at one point in my life. And I'm so happy now that I'm on the other side of that to be able to share with you some of the tips and tricks that kind of helped me navigate those seasons of life. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got our first slide here about what we've learned about the need for flexible instruction as it relates to test prep. And so what we're talking about here is when people talk about flexible instruction in our current climate, it has something to do with the idea of not doing things the way we have always done them with those traditional rows of seating. And it's not just even the more innovative idea of smaller cooperative learning groups or small group instruction. It's actually going beyond that, where we are including virtual instruction as part of this as well. Flexible instruction is the idea of meeting your students where they're at. So understanding that every child does not learn the same way. And because of that, we can't train every child the same way to do well on a test. We've got some students, clearly, when we talk about multiple intelligences, who are doing really well when it comes to auditory learning or visual learning, kinesthetic learning, interpersonal, intrapersonal, knowing that you have multiple ways that your students in your classroom are learning. And then to layer on top of that, they're not all in your classroom at the same time. Maybe you also are going to be dealing with some students who are in a hybrid environment, some that are virtual only. Maybe you're the virtual teacher and all your students are in the classroom. Whatever this looks like, we do have a need for flexible instruction because right now we know that we're not going to be able to reach every student in exactly the same way. But now that we know that, we also have to be able to adjust for state testing prep. So even if you're a virtual instructor, even if you work for Proximity or you work for any of our other companies that do things that are similar to what we're doing, where we live stream virtual instructors into brick and mortar classrooms where your students are all there. This is new, this is innovative, this is something that's going to require a little bit of adjusting when it comes to preparing for those state exams. We also know oftentimes, and you might have heard this before the webinar got started, if you are one of those teachers and you're a teacher who is live streamed into classrooms, typically during state testing, you can't be there. You can't proctor from a distance. So instead, you are going to have facilitators in class who are going to be able to proctor for you. And what this means is when we talk about this question, what do we know about this need for flexible instruction and how it relates? It means that we need to keep our students informed of the changes that they're going to see. So just like we have those students who are coming to us with a background of they've only ever been in brick and mortar and we've only ever been in brick and mortar, and we start to prepare them, okay, we're going to start covering posters around the classroom, or we're going to practice not talking for the next 30 minutes. I know it feels like a long time, but it's because I want you to get really good at what this testing day is going to look like. That's what we have to do here as well. We have to start preparing those students in a virtual environment. Okay, I know that I get so excited to see you every single day, but when this test comes on Thursday, whatever, I actually am not going to be logging in that day. Instead, you're going to have a few incredible facilitators who are going to be so encouraging and helpful, and they're going to make sure you have your pencils and they're going to make sure you have your folders or that you log into your computers, whatever that's for those students, because we don't want to surprise them. We don't want any surprises. We want them feeling completely comfortable about what they're going through. in this new environment, especially our younger students who may have never had experience with this before. So when we start to think again about who are we really preparing here, we are preparing students that are in grades typically 3 through 12 that are going to be testing, but oftentimes those 11th graders and 12th graders, they're solid. They've done this before. They know what's happening. It's going to be those students who are younger, those 3rd and 4th graders. This might be their first or second time ever testing. And if it looks different every time, one time I did it in brick and mortar, one time I'm doing it in virtual, they're going to need that constant reassurance of it's okay, here's what to expect, there are no surprises. And so I think in answering this question, what have we learned about the need for flexible instruction? We need it. We need to meet students where they're at, and we also need to prepare them so that they're not caught off guard. When we talk about pre-testing strategies that work best with different groups of students, there are a few things you can consider here. So one, we're going to talk about those different groups, that elementary. Like we had just mentioned, we want to let them know what this looks like. We want to let them know that this is what they've been preparing for all year, even if we don't teach to the test, because we shouldn't be teaching to the test. This is something that we want to make sure that they understand. You're not getting tested on something that we haven't already covered. So constantly giving them that reassurance that you've been prepping for this, you are going to shine. This is all of the fun stuff we've done this year wrapped up into one big opportunity for you to showcase how smart you are. So constantly being able to provide students that reassurance that's not new, it's something they've studied for, and I'm going to help ease this transition into testing day because we're going to practice it. We're going to practice what testing day looks like, not to make them nervous about it, but to help ease any of those nerves that they might be having. For middle school students, we want to do it just a little bit differently. We want to make sure that those middle school students who start to feel the pressure, because they're oftentimes now aware of their GPA, and they're oftentimes working towards the different electives that they want to be a part of. They're starting to have those high school conversations of directions they're going in life post-secondary. And so these students are having a little bit different approach to testing because their mindset has shifted since when they were in elementary school. When you're in elementary school, the nerves are all about, this is the first time I'm taking a big test like that. In middle school, well, I've already taken big tests like that for at least 3 years. Now my shift is I'm about to go into high school and things are really going to matter. Then when we talk about getting those high school students ready, we have to recognize where their form of sense of nerves might be coming from. And it's going to be, wow, this is my last chance to show people what I know before going into college. Not to mention, we also have to be able to temper this with the idea that our high school students are taking the SATs, the ACTs, and any other exams that they're starting to throw in there if they're testing out of different content areas and they're trying to get their foot in the door for that post-secondary education. So when we understand where these students' mindsets are, it sometimes can make it a little easier for us to be able to teach to that, understanding that we're here because we know what you're thinking, we know what you're afraid of, and we know that this can be nerve-wracking, but we're also going to start to sprinkle in some of those SEL strategies of, I also know you have what it takes. I know you're courageous. I know you're a brave student. I know that this is something that isn't going to be your downfall. It's going to be your opportunity to shine. That was my mantra when I was teaching students. It's your opportunity to shine. It's not a scary moment. It's something for them to look forward to because all of their hard work is finally going to pay off because we're going to see how incredible they do. Now, I know some of you are thinking, hold up, could that potentially be toxic if you have students who aren't good test takers? Are you potentially setting them up for failure? I think it's really great that we think about what those consequences are, but rather than shifting our message to cater to a few of those students who might not be the greatest test takers, we want to make sure everybody feels really built up so that their confidence is there, their self-esteem is there, so that they can be the best test taker they can in that moment. And then afterwards, when we start to see who came back with what scores, having those conversations with students around, it's okay that this wasn't the moment where you were able to show everybody how smart you are because you have a full school year that shows us how smart you are. And having those conversations retroactively, I think is important instead of proactively, because we don't want to set our students up for failure. We also know about self-fulfilling prophecy. So the more we can build them up and get them thinking, yeah, I got this, I know what I'm doing, I'm prepared, the higher their likelihood of actually succeeding is. And I'm going to see that across the board 3rd through 12th grade. So I do feel like that some pre-testing strategies, if we had to list them out, is build those students up, build up their self-esteem and confidence. And then also we're going through some of those dress rehearsals. We're going to put them in the rows or the seats, put up the folders, put them in wherever they need to be, and give them opportunities for low stakes rehearsal environments. This is not something that's actually going to even count towards your middle of the year, end of the year scores. This isn't a benchmark exam. This is just simply for you to go through the motions and understand that this isn't a scary thing. And it's something you absolutely are capable of doing and doing well. So how do we empower our teachers to make the most of their instruction as opposed to feeling like they're just teaching to the test? This is something I hear regularly when I was an administrator. We have these teachers who kind of throw up their hands like, I'm not teaching the test. I don't like tests. I think this whole thing is kind of a scam. It's not something I want to be a part of. I hear you. I hear you on all of that. At the same time, we don't get to make those calls. When we are the boots on the ground at the campus, we have to implement, and we are held to the same standards across the state as all of the other teachers. So we don't have to like it, but unfortunately we do have to comply with it. We have to work within the parameters that have been set by our state of how we are evaluating student knowledge. So that's what we're going to do. So when we start to empower teachers to make the most of their instruction, what that can look like is, one, letting them know they're heard, as opposed to saying your opinions are invalid and they don't matter. It's not the case at all. Your opinions are valid. And I hope we're starting to take some steps, if that's what you choose to do, to let your voices be known. Start having those conversations with your legislators. That's what they're there for. If you want to go that direction as an independent educator, you have the right to do so. I'm going to put in parentheses though, or a little asterisk, maybe check with your union if you're in a union state as to what that looks like, or what rules you have to fall within. But the same token, I hear you, I see you, I empower you to do what you feel like you need to do outside of these classroom walls or these school walls. But while we're here, let's talk about what you can do in the classroom to feel better about this work. So one is, we're not teaching to the test. We do have state standards, and you are held accountable for teaching state standards and having your students demonstrate their ability and their capabilities in those standards. But it doesn't have to be in a testing format. So one of my favorite ways to empower teachers is to let them know, here is a long list of summative testing assessments you can use, and here is a long list of formative assessments you can use. So the idea of summative and formative assessments consistently being varied. I know that sounds a little like an oxymoron, consistently varied. What I mean by that is we're continuously keeping the momentum going, because we're not just saying every single day is a pop quiz, every single day is a multiple choice or a true false test, every single day is one. No, when we've got a long list or a menu of options of both summative and formative assessments, that's one way you can empower teachers to kind of exercise their creativity in the classroom by being able to say, you know what? For my summative assessment, we're not going to take a comprehensive exam. We're going to have students demonstrate their knowledge through, maybe you give them the opportunity to act something out, to build something, to evaluate something, to create a website that demonstrates their knowledge in a certain area. Also being able to incorporate technology. Oftentimes for teachers, this can be a little scary because we think, well, technology gives students all the answers. It takes away their freedom to think creatively or critically. But at the same token, we want to be able to embrace technology, because this is the world that our students were brought up in. Wasn't necessarily the world all of us were brought up in. We learned it and it became a part of our world. But we've got students today who have never lived in a world in which an iPhone didn't exist from the day they were born until now. And that's not the only example. There are plenty of examples of how students today have been brought up with technology. It's not as scary to them as it might be to some of us. And so I would encourage you to continue to embrace technology. ChatGPT right now, it's all the rage. And I know some of you are probably like really upset at it and you're completely against it. Other people are already finding ways to incorporate it into your classroom. Would say start to incorporate those things in your classroom. I'm not telling you that if you're against it, your ideas are wrong. I'm saying that if we fight it, it's here anyway, and it's only going to make your life harder. So I would encourage you to find ways to understand how to use it in a way that facilitates learning, and that you're also being aware of, well, I'm going to have to think through, how do I prevent my students from plagiarizing? How do I prevent my students from spreading false information? these are ways where we're empowering teachers to get creative about solving some of those problems. So the same way we're trying to build our students to be well-informed, educated citizens that continue to contribute to society, we're doing the same thing with our teachers. Hey, you're coming up across a problem in your industry that directly affects your ability to perform. Let's problem solve for that. So we're allowing our teachers to identify the things that are preventing them or from being able to perform or from their students being able to perform and addressing some of those obstacles. So what is something you wish someone would have prepared you for when you first started to support teachers in test prep strategies? I think this is a really interesting question, and I'd love to hear from anybody who's watching. If you'd like to drop it in the Q&A or in the chat, we'd love to hear from you. But something that you wish you would have been prepared for when you first started to support teachers in test prep strategies. I think for me, one thing is oftentimes I would hear teachers get frustrated around test prep time because they feel like it's not fun. It's one of those things where we have to clean up our classrooms. We have to hide our posters. We have to take everything down. There's a lot of stress put on the students. Everybody's talking about, are you going to bed early? Are you eating a full breakfast? Make sure you're not coming to school late. There are so many pressures oftentimes, especially if you have students who are coming to you from some of those Title I schools who might not necessarily have resources at home that facilitate a solid learning day. And so we hear a lot of those stressors as well. My students are dealing with so much in their home life, and then we expect them to come here. We pour all this stress onto them about testing. And so I think that being aware of some of those ideas, some of the ideas that teachers are kind of battling with when they want for their students to be able to perform and do the best that they can in an environment like that. But at the same time, they recognize that students are coming to them with some baggage that might prevent them from being able to perform to the best of their ability. They don't have the opportunity to go to sleep early if people are screaming in their classrooms. They don't have the opportunity to eat a full breakfast if they don't have food in the pantry. So there are some of those things that I think if we as administrators can proactively bring up to our teachers, like, let's talk about our students, let's talk about what they need, and let's problem solve. I know the school I was at, we ended up giving out all kinds of great breakfast foods. This was back in the day before almost everybody got free breakfast. We had teachers who were bringing in some homemade food. We were able to go, lots of granola bars were everywhere. We were being able to provide for our students in a way that we felt that might make this day feel a little bit more fun for them. They were getting access to things that they didn't usually have access to. So I think that's another one, is how you position stuff to them rather than we're taking everything away. Here's some really cool stuff that you get to have this week that you don't really get the rest of the school year. You don't really get Miss So-and-so bringing in her famous breakfast bars. We don't really get all these fancy glow-in-the-dark pencils that we brought in for y'all this week. And so it's making it a little bit more fun and incentivizing the week, as opposed to, this is a week where you're quiet, you're serious, everything matters. We don't want it to come across like that. I love some of the things that I'm seeing in the chat right now, though. People are talking about building those relationships, absolutely, with your students. I don't feel like you can teach anything academically if you don't have a solid relationship with your students. And then knowing what other tests happen the same week, it's important not to give more than one test for certain ages. Great point. Of course, if it's state testing, we don't have the opportunity to schedule those, but all of those summative tests that you might be giving out in preparation for state testing, absolutely agree with that. So thanks for sharing those in the chat. When students exhibit a lack of motivation or even isolation due to test anxiety, what intervention strategies might teachers implement? And so here we're talking about this, I know we've all heard of test anxiety. Test anxiety is something that I'm sure you've even felt as an adult. When we are going in for those certification tests as educators, for example, people get test anxiety. And I think one thing that we can do, that I like to do with students, is we're going to go in there and we're going to talk about it, because I don't want them to pretend like it doesn't exist. That doesn't help anybody. And then once we talk about it, we're going to start thinking through, what are some things that we can do when we feel this way? So I'm going to make sure you feel equipped with some testing strategies. Here's how I want you to read the question, and here's how I want you to evaluate each of the options. We're also going to talk about, if you have nervous energy and you're feeling this anxiety, recognizing it's there and being able to shift some of that nervous energy energy into motivation, drive, ambition, shifting some of that nervous energy into I got this. So going from, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed, I can't handle it, to I've really got this, I'm in control. I know that. And then you start giving students some stats to work with. I know that on average, I answer a test question in 2.5 minutes. I know that I have 4 hours to complete this test. That means if I should get through the entire test and still have 2 hours left to go, I can work with that, because worst case scenario, if I need to spend 1 hour on one question, I still got that. So I think if we can start to put things in context where students are like, oh yeah, worst case scenario, I'm still in control here. And I think that's really helpful as adults too. I think that way when I go into tests, I'm like, what is the worst case scenario if I get into this test and I completely panic and I spend too long on one of my questions? What can I do? And so just running through what some of those options are. Maybe an option is you skip a question. If in the big picture, I skip one question and I'm getting asked 85 questions on a test, what does that mean? I come back at the very end and I can randomly choose something if I'm still stuck, but not letting getting stuck on one question make the rest of the test feel like it's inaccessible or I just can't move on. Flag it, come back to it. So I think giving students some of those tools so that they feel like I'm in control here. I'm not going to let this test dictate how I feel about this situation. I recognize the test is a job that has to get done, but I have some strategies to do it well. So I hope that helps. And then how does your district set itself apart as a quality educational option for families? Well, I love this question because it was for our special guest who we're going to have today. But since he's not here to speak to that, I can speak to proximity learning. I would say that one thing that proximity does to set itself apart is that we have this push for equity that is very hard for any other organization to be able to have this same mission that we do, because we are one of the only organizations, we're not the only one, but we're one of the only organizations that can provide high quality state certified live instructors to every single school district across this country. And what this is doing for equity is making sure that if you live in an area, let's say, for example, you live in a rural school district and you do not have anybody in your area, in your geographic boundaries, that can speak Mandarin Chinese and is a certified teacher, that means the students who live in those geographic boundaries of your district don't have access to that. And when they apply to college, and maybe this is an interest of theirs is Mandarin Chinese, they're going in there with zero background. And it's not just Mandarin Chinese. It could be CTE courses. It could be AP courses, IB courses. Maybe you have too many students in your AP stats course. Now you have a teacher-student ratio of 1:35, and your students aren't getting the attention that they need to be successful. Well, with proximity, you can bring our teachers in who are certified, who are live streaming. They're not recorded talking heads, but they are building relationships with the students in your classroom in a variety of topics, including foreign languages, CTE, electives, and they're doing it in the K-12 platform. This is really setting them apart, and at the same time, it is creating equity for your students, because your students now have access to courses and to smaller class sizes because you have the option to offer them live stream virtual instruction. As far as professional development sessions, topics, or resources, I would recommend other educational administrators or teachers explore as they prepare for testing season. I would say some of the best resources that I've come across, if you're with younger students, is Class Dojo. If you haven't seen or used Class Dojo before, I would highly encourage you to. What that's going to do for you is really help you feel more equipped with the social emotional terms like resilience, perseverance, growth mindset, some of those things that we want to start building into children as part of their approach to state testing so that they feel confident going into it. And although it is geared towards elementary students, I would still encourage my middle and high school teachers and administrators to peruse it. You don't have to share the actual lessons with your students like you would in elementary, but it might even help you just build your vocabulary up so that you feel better equipped to have those conversations with your students. I would say another thing that I'm hoping most of you have already tapped into would be your educational agency's website for the state that you're in. So for example, I'm here in Texas, and here at the Texas Education Agency, or TEA, they have an incredible website that's actually populated with a lot of previously released tests. And of course, this is helpful because it gives you an idea as an educator, the type of questions, the layout of the test, how long it is, and it can give you the information that you need when you're starting to teach your students some of those testing strategies. Because remember, we're not teaching to the test. We're not like, here is the question, memorize it, memorize the answer. But we are preparing them to feel equipped to go in there and not be blindsided. And accessing previously released exams is one of the very best ways to do that. So you don't have to teach them to memorize it, but you teach them this is what you can expect, so you're not blindsided by the actual day of testing environment. Another thing you can do with those, if you're not already doing those, is have the students take one of those tests and then have them check their own answers according to the released answers that go with that test, and then have them try to make the connection instead of just got it, didn't get it. Let's look at the ones that you didn't get, and let's evaluate how you chose your answer versus the answer that you should have selected, and have those conversations, because that's when you start to fill in the gap, or you can correct any misunderstandings or misconceptions that your students might have. Finally, I think this is the last question. When I encounter a challenge in education, where do I go to find solutions? I think there are lots of answers here. Primarily, I want to go to my colleagues, to my peers. I think that oftentimes we are working with some of the smartest people in the world right in our very own building. They are talented, they're dedicated, and they're probably trying some things that I may have never heard of before. So one of the very first places I go to are to my colleagues, and I let them know, hey, I might be having a problem with this. Have you experienced it before? What have you tried? Has this worked? I'm thinking of doing this. Have you done that before? What was it like for you? So asking those colleagues those questions. The other thing that I like to do is go to YouTube. I know that I'm typically not going to be the very first person in the world to experience a certain challenge. Somebody before me has done this, and somebody's been successful at solving for it. So I'm going to look it up. I'm going to Google it. I'm going to YouTube it. I'm going to see what other people are doing to experience this. And then I also like to go to my students. It's sometimes hard to remember what it's like to be in their shoes, and having that childlike perspective to generating some new solutions can sometimes get this aha moment that we would have not had as adults. So let them know, hey, you know what? This is something I'm struggling with because I'm a human. I think I've seen you come up with some really good ideas before. What do you think we should do? Can you help me solve this problem? And what an honor it will feel to that student to be like, what, an adult is coming to me with the problem they have? I can't believe it. Of course, make sure if you do that with a student that it is academic related. Please don't go to students with personal problems. They still need to know that you're a stable adult in their life, but it's okay to say, you know what? We're just having an issue because, for example, I'm supposed to, I don't know, it could be a seating chart thing. I'm supposed to come up with a seating chart, but when I look at it, I'm just like, I know we should probably put these students closest to the door for this reason, and probably these students over here, but I think there might be some chatting. What do you think we can do? And do you know which students I'm calling on? The ones that talk too much, the ones that I'm trying to solve the problem for. Because if I let them be part of solving that problem, it's also going to help from a behavior management perspective and relationship building. So for all of those reasons, I think I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I bring those students in for those conversations. Well, that is all we have for today. I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds. If you have any questions for me, please drop it in the chat, or you can put it in the Q&A box. I am able to watch both of those at this point. But I am so glad I had the opportunity to spend this afternoon with you. If you can't think of any questions right now, but you do think of something later, I do encourage you to email me. That's awillis@proxlearn.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And it was an honor for me to be able to spend this afternoon with you. And I sure hope we get to see you in our next webinar. We'll be having one next month. We tend to have one webinar every month, and we would love for you to continue joining us. Also, we do have recordings of all of these webinars. So even if you aren't able to watch it live, if you register, we will always follow up with an email so that you can watch it afterwards. And with that, I want to thank all of you for your time, and I wish you a very wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.